NtlatlapaMosae. I work for a law firm called Sello-Mafatle Attorneys. We have recently had regulations relating to cannabis, the Drugs of Abuse Cannabis Regulations 2018. They come from the Drugs of Abuse Act of 2008. So you can realize the gap. The act was made in 2008 and regulations only came in 2018. That is like 10 years later. So we are at that crawling stage where we are allowed to cultivate cannabis, but we have just learned how we're supposed to regulate that. So that is the space we are at currently. The regulations are specifically aimed at licensing and export of cannabis, manufacturing and cultivation of cannabis. What the regulations are not aimed at is the use of cannabis locally. So I see that as one of the first challenges that we might have as a country, because there's a situation of having a good product which cannot be administered locally, despite the fact that the Drugs of Abuse Act of 2008 allows for the use of cannabis locally. However, because of the absence of regulations relating to dispensing, the types of doctors who are allowed to give out prescriptions, in fact, the country would be a bit uncomfortable allowing the use of cannabis in the absence of that, because the act is clear that it is aimed at ensuring availability of the product and the use of the product for medicinal and scientific purposes. The act is clear that the product should not be used for recreational purposes. Now, in the absence of regulations relating to dispensing, chances of the product being used in the illicit market and for recreational purposes are high. Hence, I believe that in the absence of regulations relating specifically to that, we are going to find ourselves in a predicament. I think looking at the U.S. legal framework, the fact that the product is legalized from a state level and still illegal from a federal level makes it very difficult for countries such as Lesotho to have any form of business relationship with the United States, because the product cannot move across state borders. So what more from a different country? So that's the first thing that I learned. But from a regulatory perspective, we are, as a country, we are at a situation where there's still debates about whether the licensing fee, which is now 500,000 for an operator license, whether that in itself is not restrictive for the locals to enter into the market. But at the same time, if the licensing fees would be cheaper, that would open up doors for any kind of person to enter into that kind of market. But we especially when we have regulations aimed at exporting, we need the right people to enter into that kind of market because of the high regulation. When you flip through our 2018 regulations, they are clear that there should be mandatory testing for the product. And the testing is done by an independent lab, which is ISO accredited. So that is something that one has learned from advanced states. So with this kind of summit, I was hoping that one can bring back home more. Just on that issue that we touched on about the 500,000 relating to licensing fees, there was a time where it was illegal even to possess just a joint. And some people have gone to jail for about 3 years relating to that type of offense. So what the US is doing is to say those people who are unable to enter into who are now unable to enter into the cannabis market because of that criminal record relating to cannabis, let's sort of give them a pardon to say if it wasn't violent, it just involved possessing that. Despite you having that kind of criminal record, we will allow you to enter into the market. So for me, that says when you are aware of the limitations brought by your legislation, as a state, you have an obligation to go back and to see how you can remedy that. Because the intention of the state is not necessarily to say we do not want certain people to enter into the market. Those that we do not want to enter into the market should be for valid reasons. So I believe as Lesotho, the country did not make a conscious decision to say we do not want locals to enter into the market. Rather, it said we want people with the right skills, people who will be able to produce quality product which is safe. Those are the type of peoples that we want them to enter into the market. So how are we going to have that, but at the same time opening up doors for locals? I think what one can learn from a summit of this nature is how to ensure the quality of the product, how to ensure the availability of the product, how to ensure that the product is used strictly for medicinal purposes. Well, I've learned that here people are very liberal. It is being used for recreational purposes. Now, that is certainly something that I'm sure I'll be unable to plow back home, because if we are still at a stage where we are uncomfortable with the use of it for medicinal purposes, what more for recreational purposes? So I think what I will definitely be able to bring back home is that there is a chance that we can come up with a mechanism of allowing the locals to enter into the market. We're discussing ways to bring capital into the business. The challenge that the US is having is this. Cannabis is still illegal from a federal level, and a lot of banks are regulated federally. So one cannot go to the bank and get a loan to, to use in the cannabis industry. Number two, money from the cannabis industry cannot go to the bank. So the US has a challenge of having a lot of cash lying around. So at any particular point in time, one can just be short because they know that you are walking around with around 10,000 US dollars. So that is a challenge that as a country we are not having. And that says to me, we have to capitalize on the fact that as locals, because it is legal to enter into the cannabis market. Looking at the kind of profits that surround the cannabis industry, I think it will be it's easier for locals to get capital and use it in the cannabis industry. So I think it's something that one can sort of bring back home to say here is a loophole. We're discussing the challenge of pesticides. Cannabis, as opposed to your typical tomato, when when you have pests, you cannot just spray it with pesticides because of the nature of the plant. It's going to be absorbed and it's going to be very toxic to those who be consuming it. So because of our climate, Lesotho, the lowest point in Lesotho is around 1,000 meters above sea level. So that is not a conducive environment for pests to grow at. So we are at a situation where we have a country that can produce the cleanest cannabis in the world. That's number one. Number two, we have one of the cleanest water in the whole world. And that is something that is needed for the cannabis industry. Number three, We have a lot of land which is unutilized. And because our zoning laws are not as stringent as those in the US, chances of thriving in the industry are higher. So I think those are some of the things that I learned, and I believe with such kind of information, then the state can use such knowledge to ensure that it invites investors to come into Lesotho and see what kind of collaborative work we can do together. And yeah. I think the difference is this with the banks here, in as much as they see how lucrative the industry is, the fact that it is illegal to enter into that market, there is no way a bank would finance something of that nature. Here. Yes. Yes. But back home, it's legal to enter. So the banks on a state level. Yes, on a state level. So the banks there can finance that kind of venture because it's legal. The only thing that you have to prove is that you have the necessary capacity to produce the right quality. You have the right people in your team. And I think it's easy for you as a local to enter into some form of partnership with someone from outside who has the skills. But you'll be bringing in the land, you'll be bringing in a bit of capital from the bank. So I think more of a collaborative work can come out of that.